Before Nathan and I came into the world, my parents lived a modest but hopeful life in a small, tightly knit town. My father was a mechanic, and my mother managed a local diner. They weren't wealthy, but they were dreamers, determined to create a better life for their future children. When I was born, I became their miracle baby, a joy they thought they'd never have. In those early years, their attention and love felt like the warm sun on my face. They called me their little achiever, marveling at every milestone I reached. But that golden chapter of my childhood ended when Nathan came along 2 years later. Suddenly, everything became about him. He was their unexpected blessing, and while I initially enjoyed my role as the older sibling, it didn't take long for me to notice how the balance shifted. Nathan's every action was celebrated. His first steps, his first words, even his tantrums were excused with indulgent smiles. Meanwhile, my efforts seemed to fade into the background. As we grew older, this dynamic only worsened. Nathan was loud, mischievous, and charming in a way that drew people in, while I was quieter and more reserved. Teachers praised my academic achievements, but at home, my parents barely acknowledged them. If Nathan got a B on a spelling test, there would be ice cream and congratulations. My straight A's earned little more than a nod and a good job. By the time I reached high school, the resentment had taken root. Nathan's needs always came first. While I worked hard mowing lawns and tutoring to save for college, Nathan received generous allowances for doing nothing. My parents often said, "You're older. You can handle it," as if that justified their favoritism. I told myself it would be different once I left for college, that my achievements would finally mean something. But even when I secured a full scholarship, the news was overshadowed by Nathan's decision to attend community college. There was a party for him, not for me. That quiet bitterness followed me into adulthood. Though I tried to move past it, Nathan's shadow seemed to loom over every part of my life. Little did I know, it was a shadow that would eventually threaten to consume everything I held dear. Leaving home was supposed to be my liberation. College gave me the chance to carve out an identity away from my parents' favoritism and Nathan's constant overshadowing. I threw myself into my studies, worked part-time jobs, and made a few good friends. It was during this time that I learned the value of independence and self-reliance. I realized I didn't need my parents' approval to feel worthy. Or so I thought. Years later, I was 27, living in the city, and finally building the life I had dreamed of. My job at a small tech firm was steady, my apartment cozy, and my days busy yet fulfilling. It was around this time that I met Claire. She worked at the coffee shop across the street from my office. Claire was magnetic in a way that caught me off guard. She had a warmth about her, a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. Her sharp wit and easy laugh drew me in, and before I knew it, I was finding excuses to visit the coffee shop more often than I cared to admit. Our first real conversation happened on a rainy Tuesday. I'd forgotten my umbrella, and as I stood in the doorway debating whether to dash through the downpour, Claire leaned over the counter with a mischievous grin. "Waiting for the rain to stop, or do you just love our overpriced lattes that much?" she teased. I laughed, and that was it. We started talking, first about the rain, then about our jobs, our lives, and everything in between. Claire was intelligent, ambitious, and kind in a way that felt genuine. We started dating a few weeks later. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. Claire listened when I spoke about my childhood, my struggles, and my dreams. She made me feel like I was enough, just as I was. She didn't care that I came from a small town or that my family wasn't picture perfect. To her, I was someone worth loving. After a year of dating, I introduced her to my family. My parents were polite but distant. They didn't warm to Claire the way I'd hoped, instead offering subtle criticisms masked as advice. My mother remarked that Claire's career choice wasn't stable, while my father made an offhand comment about how I was punching above my weight. Nathan, on the other hand, was immediately taken with her. His charm was on full display that day, too much so. He asked Claire questions about her life with an intensity that felt invasive. He laughed too loudly at her jokes, leaned too close during conversations, and offered compliments that bordered on flirtation. At the time, I dismissed it as Nathan being Nathan. He was always the life of the party, the one everyone gravitated toward. Claire didn't seem particularly fazed by his behavior, so I let it go. Over the next few years, Claire and I grew closer. She supported me through the ups and downs of work, celebrated my promotions, and encouraged me to chase my ambitions. I proposed to her on our 5th anniversary, a quiet moment in the park where we'd had our first real date. She said yes, her smile bright enough to light up the entire city. For a moment, it felt like everything I'd ever wanted was finally within reach. But things started to shift after the engagement. Claire became restless, or maybe I just started noticing things I hadn't seen before. She spent more time on her phone, claiming it was work-related, though I often caught her smiling at messages she didn't share with me. She began staying out late, saying she was meeting friends or attending networking events. When I offered to join her, she'd wave me off, insisting it wasn't my scene. At first, I told myself it was just the stress of planning a wedding. Claire was never one for traditional events, and the pressure of coordinating everything seemed to weigh on her. I tried to be patient, to give her the space she needed, but doubt began creeping in. The final straw came one evening when I arrived home early from work. I found Claire in the kitchen, talking on the phone. She didn't hear me come in, and as I stood in the doorway, I heard her say Nathan's name, followed by a laugh that made my stomach churn. When she saw me, she quickly ended the call, her face a mask of forced cheerfulness. "Oh, you're home early. I was just catching up with your brother. He wanted to know how the wedding planning was going." Her explanation didn't sit right with me. Nathan and I were never close, and his sudden interest in our wedding felt out of character. Still, I pushed my doubts aside. I didn't want to believe that the woman I loved, the woman who had brought light into my life, could betray me. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. And as much as I tried to ignore it, the truth was waiting just around the corner, ready to shatter everything I thought I knew. As the weeks passed, Claire's behavior became harder to ignore. The small things, like her constant texting or the way she'd smile at her phone, began to feel like cracks in the foundation of our relationship. At first, I reasoned it away. Everyone gets busy, I told myself. Wedding planning is stressful. But then, the excuses started piling up. She began working late more often, coming home with vague explanations about tight deadlines or last-minute meetings. When I asked if everything was okay, she'd wave it off, claiming I was overthinking things. Yet the distance between us was undeniable. One evening, I suggested we spend the weekend together. Just the two of us, away from all the stress. I imagined a cozy getaway where we could reconnect and talk things through. Claire agreed but then canceled at the last minute, saying a work event had come up that she couldn't miss. It wasn't just the cancellations or the missed opportunities for time together. It was the way she spoke to me, less like a partner and more like someone she had to tolerate. Conversations that used to flow easily now felt strained. When I asked her opinion on the flowers or the guest list, she'd shrug or offer half-hearted responses, as if none of it mattered to her anymore. I started noticing Nathan's name coming up more frequently in her conversations. She'd mention how he'd offered to help with the wedding or how he'd suggested a venue she thought might work. At first, I appreciated the effort. Maybe Nathan was trying to make amends for the years of tension between us. But the way Claire talked about him felt different. One day, while scrolling through her phone for photos of potential venues she'd mentioned, I stumbled across a message thread with Nathan. The messages weren't overtly inappropriate, but they were personal, too personal. They joked about inside things I wasn't a part of, and Nathan had sent her a photo of himself at the gym, shirtless, with a caption, "Think I can pull this off at the wedding?" I confronted Claire about the messages that night, trying to keep my tone calm. "What's going on between you and Nathan?" I asked, my voice tight. Claire's response was immediate and defensive. "Are you serious? He's your brother. He's just trying to be helpful. Honestly, I can't believe you'd even think that." Her reaction left me feeling guilty for even bringing it up. Maybe I was reading too much into things. Nathan was my brother, after all, and Claire had never given me a reason to doubt her before. But the doubts didn't go away. Claire started spending more time at my parents' house, supposedly to discuss wedding logistics with my mom. "She wants everything to be perfect for us," Claire would say with a smile. When I offered to join, Claire always had a reason for me not to come. "You've been so stressed with work," she'd say. "Just let me handle this part, okay?" One night, curiosity got the better of me. I called my mom to ask how the planning was going. Her response sent a chill down my spine. "Oh, Claire didn't come by today," she said casually. "Why? Was she supposed to?" My heart sank. Where had Claire been all evening if not at my parents'? When she got home later that night, I didn't bring it up. I wanted to believe there was a reasonable explanation, but my instincts screamed otherwise. The tipping point came during a family dinner. My parents had invited us over to discuss the wedding, and Nathan was, of course, the center of attention. He dominated the conversation, as usual, cracking jokes and sharing exaggerated stories about his life. At one point, I noticed Claire laughing at something Nathan had said. It wasn't the laugh that bothered me, it was the way she looked at him, a mix of amusement and admiration that I hadn't seen in a long time. I tried to brush it off, but later that night, as we lay in bed, I couldn't keep quiet any longer. "Claire, do you still want to marry me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She turned to me, startled. "What kind of question is that?" "Of course I do." But her words felt hollow, like a script she'd memorized. For the first time in our relationship, I felt truly alone. The Claire I had fallen in love with, the woman who made me feel like I was finally enough, was slipping away. And no matter how much I wanted to hold on to her, I could feel the truth looming on the horizon, waiting to tear my world apart. The uneasy feeling in my chest had grown unbearable. Claire's continued evasiveness, the strange dynamic between her and Nathan, and the lingering doubt gnawed at me daily. I told myself I was imagining things, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. One evening, determined to find answers, I decided to come home earlier than usual. Claire had told me she would be out for dinner with her colleagues, but something about her tone felt rehearsed. She didn't offer specifics, which was unlike her, and I couldn't shake the nagging thought that she wasn't where she claimed to be. As I turned the corner to our apartment, I saw a car parked out front. It was Nathan's. My heart pounded as I tried to rationalize his presence. Maybe he'd dropped by to pick something up. Maybe Claire had asked him to help with the wedding plans. But when I stepped inside, the truth hit me like a punch to the gut. There they were, in the living room, sitting close on the couch. Claire jumped up the moment she saw me, her face pale. Nathan, however, didn't flinch. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite place, somewhere between guilt and defiance. "Hey," Claire said, her voice unnaturally high. "You're home early." I looked at Nathan, then back at her. "What's going on here?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and dread. Claire stammered, "We were just talking about the wedding." Nathan offered to help with the guest list. Nathan said nothing, his silence only adding to the tension. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that this was just a misunderstanding, that I was overreacting. But the way Claire avoided my gaze, the way she fidgeted with her hands, told me otherwise. "Is that true?" I asked Nathan directly. For a moment, he didn't respond. Then, with a sigh, he stood up and said, "Maybe we should just tell him, Claire." "Tell me what?" I demanded, my voice rising. Claire's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she began, her words tumbling out in a frantic rush. Nathan and I, we didn't plan this. It just happened." I felt the room spinning as her words sank in. My brother. The one person who had spent our entire lives taking everything from me. My parents' attention, their praise, and now, the woman I loved. "How long?" I managed to choke out. Claire hesitated, then whispered, 6 months. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of sneaking around behind my back, of pretending everything was fine while they carried on their betrayal. But then she dropped the final bombshell. "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice barely audible. "And it's Nathan's." The room went silent. The weight of her confession hit me like a freight train. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Everything I'd built, everything I believed in, was crumbling before my eyes. Nathan stepped forward, as if to say something, but I raised a hand to stop him. "Don't," I said, my voice shaking. "Don't say a word." Without another glance at either of them, I walked out of the apartment. My mind was racing, my heart shattered. I drove aimlessly for hours, replaying every moment of our relationship, every sign I had ignored. How had I been so blind? The days that followed were a blur. Claire tried calling, leaving voicemails begging me to talk, to work things out. Nathan, unsurprisingly, stayed silent. My parents, when they found out, were quick to defend him. "He made a mistake," my mother said over the phone. "He's your brother. You have to forgive him." Forgive him? For what? For betraying me in the worst way possible? For destroying what little trust one had left in my family? I couldn't forgive. Not him. Not Claire. Not even myself for allowing it to happen. I cut ties with them all. My parents, Nathan, and Claire. I packed my things and moved out of the apartment we had shared, leaving behind the life I thought I was building. The grief was overwhelming, but so was the anger. I had spent my entire life feeling like I wasn't enough, and this betrayal only confirmed it. But somewhere in the depths of that pain, a small voice urged me to keep going, to prove to myself that I could rise above it all. I didn't know how yet, but I knew one thing. This wasn't going to be the end of my story. After leaving the apartment, I stayed in a small motel on the edge of town. It was the kind of place where anonymity thrived. No questions asked, no familiar faces to confront. For the first time in years, I was truly alone. And yet, there was an odd comfort in that solitude, even as I tried to piece together the shattered remnants of my life. Claire continued to call, leaving voicemails filled with apologies and excuses. She claimed she was confused, that she didn't mean to hurt me, that Nathan had pushed her into it. It was always someone else's fault, always a story to twist the blame. I ignored her calls, but my silence didn't stop her. One evening, she showed up at the motel unannounced, standing outside my door with red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands. "Please, just hear me out," she begged, her voice breaking. Against my better judgment, I let her in. I needed answers, even if I wasn't sure I could handle the truth. "I didn't plan for this to happen," she said, pacing the small room. "It started with Nathan being so supportive when you were busy with work. I felt lonely. I know that's no excuse, but—" "Stop," I interrupted, my voice cold. "Don't make this about me. You made a choice. Both of you did." Her eyes filled with tears again, but I couldn't bring myself to care. Every word she said felt like salt in an open wound. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I still love you. I made a mistake, but we can fix this." I laughed bitterly. "Fix this? You slept with my brother, Claire. You're having his child. What exactly do you think we can fix?" She didn't answer. Instead, she stood there, staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Regret, perhaps, or maybe just fear of losing the stability I'd provided. After she left, I realized that any hope of closure from her was futile. She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry for the consequences. Nathan, of course, stayed silent. He hadn't reached out once since the confrontation, and I had no intention of contacting him. But that didn't mean I could avoid him entirely. A week later, I received an unexpected call from my parents. My mother's voice was calm, almost too calm, as she informed me that they wanted to sit down as a family to discuss everything. "It's not healthy for brothers to be at odds like this," she said. "Nathan knows he made a mistake, but he's still your brother." I didn't want to go, but a part of me felt compelled to confront them all. My parents, Nathan, and Claire. Maybe I needed to hear their excuses face to face, to confirm what I already knew, that I was the expendable one in this family, always had been. When I arrived at my parents' house, the atmosphere was tense. My father sat in his usual chair, silent but watchful. My mother fussed with the coffee table, arranging and rearranging coasters as if the act might ease the tension. Nathan and Claire sat on the couch, looking anywhere but at me. "So," I said, breaking the silence, "what's this about?" My mother started speaking, her tone carefully measured. "We all make mistakes, sweetheart. Nathan knows what he did was wrong, and Claire—" "She's carrying his child," I interrupted, my voice sharp. "This isn't some minor mistake we can brush under the rug." Nathan finally spoke, his tone defensive. Look, I didn't mean for this to happen, all right? It just happened. You didn't mean for it to happen? I snapped. What does that even mean, Nathan? Did you trip and fall into her arms? Or was it just easier to betray me because you've been doing it your entire life? He flinched but didn't respond. Claire looked down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. My parents, predictably, tried to mediate. This isn't about blame, my mother said, her voice trembling. We're a family. We have to stick together. No, I said firmly, standing up. We're not a family. A family doesn't do this to each other. You've spent my entire life making excuses for Nathan, and now you expect me to just forgive him? To forgive Claire. My father sighed. You're being dramatic. People make mistakes. Nathan's your brother. Claire's still young. You don't get it, do you? I said, my voice rising. This isn't just about the affair. This is about years of being pushed aside, of being made to feel like I don't matter. Well, guess what? I'm done. With all of you. Without waiting for a response, I walked out of the house. This time, there was no hesitation, no second guessing. I knew I couldn't keep trying to fix a relationship that had been broken long before Claire and Nathan's betrayal. For the first time, I felt a sense of clarity. I was done being the afterthought, the one expected to forgive and forget. It was time to start living for myself. Leaving my family behind was a bittersweet liberation. On one hand, the weight of their betrayal no longer shackled me. On the other, I felt an aching void where the bonds of loyalty and love should have been. I rented a small apartment in a neighboring city, far enough to feel separate but not entirely severed from my past. At first, life was quiet. Too quiet. My days were a cycle of work and long, reflective evenings. Therapy became a lifeline. Each session unraveled layers of resentment and pain I didn't know I carried. The therapist's office, with its soft lighting and unyielding calm, became the place where I began to piece myself back together. But healing wasn't linear. Every so often, the wounds would reopen in unexpected ways. A song on the radio, a passing couple holding hands, or even a casual mention of a sibling, each one was a reminder of what I'd lost. One evening, as I scrolled aimlessly through social media, I stumbled upon a post that sent a chill down my spine. It was a photo of Nathan and Claire, smiling brightly at a baby shower. The caption read, "Celebrating our little miracle, due soon." My chest tightened. Despite everything, the sight of them playing happy family ignited a storm of anger and hurt. I hated myself for looking, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. Each smiling face in the photo felt like a betrayal, a confirmation that they had moved on without a second thought about the destruction they'd left in their wake. I closed the app and threw my phone onto the couch, determined not to let them pull me back into their web. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected call from my mother. I let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me, and I listened to her message. "Nathan and Claire are having a rough time," she began, her voice filled with that familiar blend of guilt and manipulation. "Nathan's struggling to keep a job, and Claire's overwhelmed with the pregnancy. They could really use some support, sweetheart. Family is all we have." I deleted the message without replying. Family, I thought bitterly. They had stripped that word of its meaning. But the call left me unsettled. As much as I wanted to forget them, the shadows of their actions lingered in the corners of my mind. Weeks turned into months, and I gradually began to rebuild. I threw myself into work, took up running to clear my head, and even joined a local book club. Something Claire had always laughed at as boring. It turned out to be anything but. The people I met there were genuine and kind, and for the first time in ages, I felt a flicker of connection that wasn't tied to obligation or betrayal. It was through the book club that I met Sophia. She was witty, compassionate, and radiated a quiet strength that drew me in. At first, I was hesitant to open up, afraid of being hurt again. But Sophia had a way of making people feel safe, like they could be their truest selves around her. As our friendship deepened, so did my feelings for her. Sophia was nothing like Claire. She didn't seek validation or thrive on drama. She was steady, grounded, and utterly uninterested in games. One evening, as we sat on a park bench overlooking a tranquil lake, I found myself sharing pieces of my story with her. About Nathan, Claire, and the betrayal that had upended my life. Sophia listened intently, her eyes soft with understanding but never pity. "You've been through so much," she said quietly. "But you're still here. That says a lot about you." Her words lingered with me long after that evening. For the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful, like maybe, just maybe, I could build a life that wasn't defined by the pain of the past. Still, the specter of Nathan and Claire hovered in the background. Their choices had torn through my life, but I was determined not to let them dictate my future. With Sophia's encouragement, I began to focus on what truly mattered, building a life of integrity, trust, and genuine connection. But as I started to move forward, life had one more curveball to throw my way. One that would force me to confront the ghosts of my past once and for all. Months passed, and I continued to carve out a new existence for myself. Sophia and I grew closer, and for the first time in years, I felt genuinely happy. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, uncomplicated and free from the chaos of my past. Then, out of nowhere, a storm from that past rolled back into my life. It began with a call from an unknown number. Normally, I would have ignored it, but something compelled me to answer. On the other end was Claire. Her voice was fraught with desperation. "Please, just listen," she said before I could hang up. "Nathan left me. I didn't know who else to call. I was stunned. What does this have to do with me?" I asked, my tone clipped. Her words tumbled out in a frantic rush. Nathan had abandoned her and their newborn son. He'd been spiraling, unable to hold a job, gambling away their savings, and growing increasingly distant. Finally, he had packed his things and left without so much as a goodbye. "I don't know what to do," she sobbed. "I made so many mistakes, but I'm trying to make things right. I don't have anyone else." Hearing her cry should have stirred some sympathy, but instead, I felt an icy detachment. This was the life she and Nathan had chosen, the one they had destroyed mine to create. And now, predictably, it was falling apart. "I can't help you, Claire," I said firmly. "You made your choices. You'll have to live with them." Her sobs grew louder. "Please, I don't need money or anything. I don't know how to do this alone." Her words didn't move me. I had spent enough time being her safety net, her fallback. I wasn't going to let her drag me back into her mess. After that call, I blocked her number, but the encounter left me uneasy. Memories of Nathan and Claire's betrayal resurfaced, clawing at the peace I had worked so hard to build. A few weeks later, I ran into an old mutual friend who updated me on Nathan's situation. Apparently, he had fled to another city, chasing some get-rich-quick scheme. Meanwhile, Claire was struggling to raise their child on her own, juggling odd jobs and relying on whatever help she could find. As much as I wanted to feel vindicated by their downfall, all I felt was exhaustion. Their chaos no longer held power over me, but their presence in the periphery of my life was an unwelcome reminder of everything I had endured. It was during this time that Sophia showed me just how much she cared. She noticed my unease and gently encouraged me to talk about it. With her support, I came to realize that I had already won. I had escaped the toxicity of my family and built a life filled with love, respect, and authenticity. Nathan and Claire's actions had consequences, ones that had finally caught up with them. And while their choices continued to ripple through their lives, I was free from their web of deceit. But the chapter wasn't entirely closed yet. The next unexpected twist would test my resolve and prove just how far I had come in reclaiming my life. The final thread connecting me to Nathan and Claire came loose in the most unexpected way. It was a quiet evening. Sophia and I were enjoying dinner at home when a knock echoed at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened it, there stood Claire, holding a small bundle, a baby swaddled tightly in her arms. Her face was pale, her eyes sunken with exhaustion. She looked like a ghost of the woman I once loved. "Please," she said softly, tears brimming. "I just need a moment." I stood there frozen, my mind racing. Sophia, sensing the tension, appeared behind me. She glanced at Claire, then at me, her expression calm but protective. "Let her in," Sophia said gently. Reluctantly, I stepped aside. Claire entered the room, her shoulders hunched as if carrying the weight of the world. She sat on the couch, the baby stirring but not crying. "I know I'm the last person you want to see," she began, her voice trembling. "But I had nowhere else to go. Nathan's gone. He hasn't sent a dime or called since he left. I'm drowning, and I can't do this alone." Her words hung in the air like a plea, but I felt no anger this time, just an overwhelming sense of weariness. "What do you want from me, Claire?" I asked, my voice even. She hesitated, then looked down at the baby in her arms. "I don't know," she admitted. "Help, advice, something. I don't even know why I came here. Maybe because I knew you'd listen." Sophia spoke up, her voice calm but firm. "It sounds like you're overwhelmed. But bringing this to him, after everything, isn't fair. He's worked hard to move forward." Claire flinched but nodded. "You're right. I just didn't know what else to do." The baby let out a soft cry, breaking the tension. Claire rocked him gently, her movements automatic but tired. For the first time, I looked closely at the child. His tiny face was a blend of Claire's features and Nathan's. Something shifted in me then, not forgiveness, but a quiet acceptance. This child was innocent in all of this. He hadn't asked to be born into such chaos, just as I hadn't asked to be caught in the middle of Claire and Nathan's betrayal. "I can't help you," I said finally, my voice steady. "Not in the way you want. You'll have to find your own path, just like I had to." Claire nodded slowly, her tears spilling over. "I understand," she whispered. Sophia stood and gently guided Claire to the door. "You need to focus on what's best for your child. That's your priority now." As the door closed behind her, I felt an odd sense of closure. I had faced the person who had once shattered my world, and I hadn't crumbled. Later that night, Sophia and I talked about what had happened. She praised me for my strength and reminded me that moving on wasn't about erasing the past but about refusing to let it control the present. In the days that followed, I thought about Claire and the baby. I hoped, for the child's sake, that she would find the strength to create a better life. But it wasn't my burden to carry anymore. I had finally closed the door on that chapter of my life, fully stepping into a future defined not by betrayal but by love, resilience, and the quiet joy of starting anew. Sophia and I began planning our future in earnest, our wedding, our home, and the life we wanted to build together. The past had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. I was free,